I see this woman weeping in front of an artwork. I see my friend deeply loving this artwork, but I'm not feeling that. I really wanted to have a powerful emotional experience with the visual arts. So I tried to figure out, how can I do this for myself?
Today, I speak with Luc Travers, an art educator, curriculum developer, and author who has spent over 20 years building a career around art and literature.
My start of my career was rather rocky. I dropped out 3 times from college. I started with art history degree and almost didn't finish it.
For years, Luc didn't know what he wanted to do with his life. He shares with us how he ultimately decided.
There's one particular day that I decided I'm going to be a teacher.
Today, Luc is known for his unique museum tours. You walk into a museum with him and walk out feeling something you didn't know art could give you. It's something I still remember 3 years later. What's now a big part of his business started as a problem he wanted to solve for himself. And we discussed exactly how that happened.
It became something I needed to solve because there were no other answers.
Today, Luc is one of the most engaging teachers I've met, but his first time teaching didn't go like that. He shares with us how he became great at it.
It was an absolute disaster. Students were absolutely bored. I didn't know what I was talking about.
I'm Alex, and this is Purposeful, the podcast where I sit down with people who have built careers and lives they genuinely love. Luc, thank you so much for being here.
I'm glad to be here, Alex.
We met in Washington in one of your museum tours 3 years ago. I think it was booked out already, but you made an exception for us. But it was nothing like the typical museum tour. I would describe it more as a way to connect with art, to experience it and feel deep emotions as you see it. It was 1 hour long, but I think we only saw 4 paintings and 1 statue. But I cannot tell you how elevated I felt afterwards and emotionally refueled from it. It really touched us, and from then on we started also buying more art for ourselves, for our home. It was very, very valuable for us, but I know it's also very valuable for others as well. I'm very excited to have you in the podcast because you're an example that there are not only these very fixed jobs like accountant, lawyer, doctor, but you created your own job, and it's very important. I'm curious, how do you describe what you do to others, since it's very unique what you do?
It's maybe a little bit challenging. Usually I just say I'm a teacher, educator, and what the term art guru has come up. But I look for opportunities to do research in what I love and to connect with people in a variety of different ways. So that takes the form of teaching literature and writing and art appreciation to high school students, elementary students, that I have done for about 20 years now, almost 20 years. And then also with adults, leading art tours and doing courses or online salons, and finding things that I love, whether it's the particular novels or the artworks, feel elevated after I experience them, then sharing that with others and seeing if the particular techniques or approach that I take, whether in literature or in art, that worked for me as I try to figure out how to get into it, can work for other people. So I guess that's a little bit. Sometimes I've heard it described as like being an educational entrepreneur. Like I look for these opportunities or I create these opportunities. Sometimes there are opportunities I wasn't expecting that come for me, and I take advantage of those too.
For people that maybe cannot really picture it, because it certainly was for me that when I go to a museum, I see a painting and maybe what I get to appreciate is the craftsmanship and how good the painting is and how realistic it maybe looks. That was as far as I could go. It was very boring to me, honestly. And I think a lot of people feel like that as well. But you develop this process of how you get to really connect with it and really feel something, and not only feel something, but also take away something from that experience and then enrich your life and maybe make different decisions based on that. So do you want to give a very quick introduction so that others know what we're talking about?
Yeah. So most of the time, you don't really get a sense of what the experience is like until you've experienced it, been on a tour yourself. So that's been one of the challenges for me actually in promoting touching the art. I just usually say here it's an art tour, but then when people come on this tour, they realize, oh my goodness, it's so much more than just an art tour because it's fundamentally different than anything else. To break it down simply, so much of appreciation of the arts thinks you've got to have a substantial amount of cultural or historical context, and you need an expert in order to tell you. You need to go in with a tour guide who's going to explain to you what the Renaissance was all about in order to appreciate this painting in the Renaissance. And it becomes an art history lesson. And that's what people usually think of when they think of going on a tour. They're going to get an art history lesson. Where the focus for me is, because I started off as an art historian, it became one where, you know what, this isn't doing it for me. It's not doing it in the same way that a movie does it for me. Because you don't take a tour guide to watch a movie. You just get immersed in the story. It's one of the key words. It's the story. There's a story there, and you are experiencing it firsthand as if it's really happening. And then you feel for the characters, and you have some feelings about the ending of the story and the meaning of the story. And depending on whether you connect with it or not, you might laugh, or you might cry, or you might feel nothing. But you've got to connect with it. So when we go in front of an artwork, a sculpture, a painting in a museum, we are immediately looking for the story and immersing ourselves in the story by what I like to call reading the artwork. And this is where I try to eliminate as much of myself from the experience. I'm there to offer guiding questions for your own reading and coming to conclusions and seeing the story and putting the pieces together for yourself. And then we want to make sure that we're seeing a way to empathize with these characters, to connect with them, to say, when have I been in a moment like this? Oh, what are they going through? Have I gone through something like that? And when you're able to connect with the characters, which is something that you do with movies you care about them because you do connect with the characters. But when you're able to, it's like having a conversation with a friend and you're saying like, oh yeah, I've been through what they're going through. You suddenly feel this sweep of emotion that comes from your own experiences, then fuse with the story that you are seeing. And that's when you start to feel this kind of elevation in front of an artwork.
Yeah, absolutely. That was the thing that did it for me. I think we were looking at a painting where you would see a soldier, maybe a Roman soldier, and he would be very tired, almost asleep in a chair. And behind him was this girl. And then we would be analyzing it and describing exactly what we see. And as we describe it, we pay attention, we start understanding the story. Mm-hmm. It looks like this is a soldier who just came from war, and this is his wife, and she wants to spend time with him because she hasn't seen it in a long time, but she doesn't want to wake him up because he's tired, clearly. And so then you ask the question, when have you felt like that? Have you been around a person that you missed for a long time and finally get to see them, and you really connect with that? And I really like that because it was very emotional. It doesn't happen often that you get an experience that really enriches your life, and not only that experience, but also gives you the skill set to do that from then on. So that was extremely, extremely valuable. So thank you so much, Luc, for that.
Of course.
I'm very curious, how did you get to start with that? I remember you shared one story that you saw a lady watching a painting and cry. And I think that motivated you to see, oh, wow, I've never felt that way. I'm still curious, like, what motivated you to pursue that path? Because I think a lot of other people would maybe see that and would brush it off, or maybe think it's a weird lady, but what did you find in that experience that led you to this path?
So I studied art history. I studied art history after I dropped out of college the first time when I was studying philosophy. I was already interested in ideas and finding meaning. I became interested in art history because it was like the picture book of philosophy. You look at a certain time period, ancient Greece, and you see the artwork that embodied philosophy of the ancient Greeks in comparison to ancient Egypt. And the artwork was a reflection of the culture and what animated the deeper ideas that animated the culture. And I loved that. But what I found was that every time I would come to an artwork, I was interested in understanding artist motivations, the cultural significance of it, the background history. I was interested in understanding the history of it, but never did I feel like I was connected to the artwork. And so I would see people who would respond to art and start to weep and start to have some kind of connection to it. And I'd be a little bit baffled because I wasn't feeling that myself. I was feeling points inspired, but it was only after I would read about what made this artwork significant, or have some kind of touchstone with the ideas that were part of the culture that it animated, but never in the experience of the artwork. And it's only when I started asking myself, okay, what's going on here? Why am I not feeling this? That I started realizing there's art that I feel powerfully about, but it's music and it's movies, and sometimes it's literature, but mainly movies and music. And at that point I started asking myself, and this is the important moment, I really wanted to have a powerful emotional experience with the visual arts. So I tried to figure out, how can I do this for myself? And I started asking myself, okay, what is it that I do when I watch a movie or read a novel that I'm really enjoying? What is it I do there that I'm not doing with a painting? I was seeing all these different, well, not very different answers. There was basically two answers for art appreciation. One, study the art history. Two, it's all subjective, and whatever you feel is valid. But that's not an answer to how to do it. It just made me feel a little worse. Like, okay, everything's subjective. My feelings are valid, but I'm not having any feelings in front of this artwork. So I started to try to figure out a method for myself. And because I decided, and I was in education at the time, I was thinking, okay, how can I share that with other people?
So did you learn that primarily through your own observations and integrations, or are you able to learn from someone else?
I got lots of hints and influences from other people. One of the big influences in my life was my friend Lee Sandstead, who inspired me to get into art history. He was in art history. We took a couple of trips together when I was 19 years old to Italy and to Greece. And I started loving art and seeing, like I talked about, seeing that these pieces were not beautiful, but they embodied ideas. And I think maybe the more significant thing I picked up from him is that looking at an artwork, that there can be not just historical meaning, but human meaning. I remember one particular lecture that he gave on intimacy in art. So that concept of intimacy is something wonderful and wonderful to contemplate. And then you get to look at all these beautiful artworks that show intimacy. And that idea led me down the way. It still wasn't, I wasn't reading the artwork and immersing myself in the story, but I was seeing that there's value here for me to gain, not just from the art historical perspective, but from a human value perspective. But a lot of it was me trying to figure it out for myself. Trial and error, experimentation. Okay, what do I do when I'm in front of the artwork? Do I just look? Do I look at the plaque? Do I get the art history text? You know what? An artwork is like the reverse of literature. When you're reading a novel, you picture the imagery in your mind's eye of the characters, of the action, and the more you do that and are able to do that, the more alive and real the artwork becomes, the more immersed you are in the story. Painting, it dawned on me, is the reverse of that. With a painting, you have the image, but you don't have the words. And so in order to complete the experience, you provide the concepts for the particular concrete. So that's where the idea of you as the person who's experiencing the artwork need to provide the words. You need to read the artwork and to read it as if you don't know anything about it. Like you go into a mystery story and you are picking up clues and you're wondering where it's going. And so that's the way you let a painting story unfold for you at your pace as you start to read it by giving your words to the artwork. So that kind of idea is something that I started figuring out and testing out and seeing that it worked for me. And then came, okay, let me see if it works for other people. And that became more of a test to see, okay, this is a method is applicable to not just me. It's not just subjective. It's a technique that can be used by other people. And that's where it became more of, okay, something I use in the classroom, something I'm going to use on tours, create a business out of.
I really like it because for me, nowadays, we are so focused on learning from other people, reading books, watching courses, going to university. It's always about learning from others. And there's a lot of value in that. And there's a lot of value in teachers. But sometimes you just need to focus on what you want and make your own observations and integrations. And you can get very far and develop your own method around these things. So I find that very, very inspiring, and that you then develop that. And it ultimately turns out into your business and you're making a living from that.
I don't think that the essential is that I did it all on my own and drew things. I think the important thing in terms of finding a business path or finding something that's meaningful to you is that it was a problem in my own life that I wanted to figure out and solve. And I looked for answers and tried to piece it together. And it was what I figured out was very satisfying for me. But it was something I was seeing, what became a business ideas. I was seeing the answers that were provided, and I was saying, well, you know what? I've got a different answer than what's being provided. It became something I needed to solve because there were no other answers. It was a deficiency in the market. It's something that started off not as let me examine what's in the marketplace and see what the deficiency
Right.
is.
Yeah.
It ended up being that way, but first it was, I see this woman weeping in front of an artwork. I see my friend deeply loving this artwork, but I'm not feeling that. How can I help to change that for myself?
Yeah.
And meet it, this is a real value. This is something that I know can work. And if I looked up some 19th century manual on art appreciation that existed, and there was like some really helpful guidelines that are like, oh wow, this is really valuable, then maybe my career might be like, here are these teachings from this person from the 19th century about art appreciation that I want to share,
Right.
that I found, that I've loved. And in some ways, with education, there are lots of authors and scholars that I like, that I'll promote, that I'll point to, that I'll share. For example, one educational tool that I came across after I started figuring out touching the art for myself that I really liked is like, oh, this is really helpful for engaging people with art, was a method called visual thinking strategies, VTS. And that's something that I've spent some time studying, and I've started incorporating that in my work. I found it, wow, this is really valuable to help me lead discussions about art. So yes, I figured out a lot of things for myself, but also I think the main thing is I've got the challenge or the problem that I want to solve, and then I try to figure out how to solve it, first by seeing if there are answers out there, but then seeing, okay, maybe I've got to figure out something for myself. But the first-handed thing is I want to discover genuinely an issue that I want to understand the solution for.
Yeah, absolutely. That reminds me a lot of my own journey, where have all these different interests and I want to figure out what I want to do with my life, and it's generally difficult to make a decision. So I go through this journey to solve my own problem, and then learn some things. I make my own observations and integrations and connect these things and end up with something that is also valuable for others. But it's true, it didn't start out like this. So I'm curious, were you always in this line of what you wanted to do with your life?
I developed over time. When I was a kid, at one point I wanted to be a paleontologist, study dinosaurs. At one other point I wanted to be a professional soccer player. Sometime in high school I decided I wanted to be a philosopher. So I started off college getting a philosophy degree and did 3 years of that before I dropped out. And I think that over time there's certain interests that I have that have kind of streamed down. I can see my interest in paleontology kind of show up in art history. And also I remember when I was 9 years old having a gathering of people at a Christmas party all around me, and adults, and I was telling them all about Stegosaurus and Triceratops, and I was excitedly animated. So there are strains of me being a teacher, and I think that's my profession. It's teaching. There's one particular day that I decided I'm going to be a teacher, and this was, I think I was 19. And I had been doing substitute teaching. You could be a substitute teacher if you had a high school diploma. So right out of high school, I started substitute teaching as a part-time job. My friend Lee, that I mentioned before, was a substitute teacher, and he said, Luke, you got to try this out. You just read all day long. You don't have to do anything. It sounded like great, glorified babysitting, and I get a lot of time. Did that for a while, and then there was one particular day where the teacher was off for an extended period of time. That meant that the students actually had to learn some lessons. And it was a math class that I was teaching, a high school math class. And it'd been a couple of years since I did algebra. I remember, whoa, okay, I got to relearn algebra. Luckily, I had the first period free. And so I went back and looked at the algebra lessons and tried to figure out for myself first, and then how am I going to teach this? Okay, it's all laid out. I went in for that first period, and it was a disaster. It was an absolute disaster. The students were absolutely bored. I didn't know what I was talking about. I was making so many mistakes. And the real issue was I was going to have to do this 5 more times that day. So I had 7 minutes between classes as I moved from one class to another. And during those, as on my walk to the next classroom, I think back, okay, what do I need to do differently? And for the next class, I instituted some small changes, and it went a little bit better. And then I did the same thing for the next class, and then for the next class. And over the course of the day, it got better and better and better. The last class of the day, students were raising their hands. They were eager to answer questions, and I was feeling competent. And I remember after the school day was over, students had left. I was still there. I don't know why I was still there in the hallways of the school, and I was striding. My chest was out, my head was lifted, and I was feeling like, wow, efficacious. I am able to do this. I'm capable of teaching. It was one of the first really powerful feelings of competence that I had. And I vaguely had notions like I wanted to be in academia or I wanted to be a philosophy professor and things like that, but I didn't really know what teaching was or whether or not I enjoyed it until that day. And I said to myself, I want teaching to be part of my work in some way. So that was 25 years ago. But that was a particular moment, that feeling competent, feeling efficacious at something that was a struggle at first, and then was able to do it. I learned to do it and had the immediate reward of seeing my ability not master it, at least do it a little bit better.
That's an amazing story. That experience fuels this choice that you then pursue for so many years afterwards. How did you end up in art and literature? Was there a similar experience, or was that something that took more time?
My start of my career, it was rather rocky. I dropped out 3 times from college. First time was philosophy. Second time, I started an art history degree and almost didn't finish it. Dropped out for a little while to do some work and make some money and to get a sense of where I was going. Went back, finished that. Started grad school in art history. Did a year of that and then dropped out again. And at that point, I was like, yes, I knew I didn't want to do academia. I also knew that I wanted to teach in some way. So I spent time teaching French. I'm a native French speaker, and I taught French for a while. And I knew that I wanted to be around art in some way. This is before touching the art. So I knew I wanted art in some way, but I also knew I wanted to teach. And there was one particular that I'd read about, the leader of the school, Lisa Van Dam, had created a school and wrote articles, and I thought, wow, I love these articles. I love her approach. And what my experience being a substitute teacher taught me, it taught me that I wanted to teach, but it also taught me I didn't want to teach in public schools because I knew at that point that I wanted more freedom creating curriculum. And that was something that I really enjoyed when I got to do projects in college and in graduate school and in writing papers and things like that. I knew I wasn't going to get it being a public school teacher. So I decided that I was going to go to New York and live in New York. If I was going to be anywhere teaching French, it'd be in the art world. Let me go up there and volunteer at the Metropolitan Museum of Art and see what happens. And I'd also applied to teach at the school in the opposite coast, the Lisa Van Dam School. And I remember on my way to New York, I was driving up from Tennessee to New York. I was supposed to give Miss Van Dam a phone call, and I stopped. This is before the days of cell phones. I stopped at a rest stop in Virginia at a payphone and gave her a call. And we spoke for half an hour about French literature. And then that she invited me out to come check it out and to give a sample class, to be interviewed essentially. And I still made my way to New York to visit, but then got on a plane to California and went out and gave a presentation on art history. And that went well and started teaching there. And at that point, again, on credit Lisa, I had started I was teaching literature and other subjects too, to especially elementary students, and I'd started becoming interested more and more in art appreciation for myself. And it was figuring out how to give a tour at a conference once that I was saying, okay, how am I going to make this a moving, powerful tour? I'd given a tour before to a group of American college students in Paris that I bribed into coming on a tour with me of the Louvre by telling them that they could get in free. And I was able to get in 20 students, but they had to stay with me. So I got a chance to tell them all the art history stuff about these artworks. So I want to try this out again, but this was the moment where I was like, oh, okay, I want to figure out how to make this more moving and more powerful for myself, and then maybe for the people who are going to come on my tour. And Lisa came on this tour, and after the tour, she said, Luc, can you do this in the classroom? She was moved by it, and she planted the idea of, okay, let's how curriculum can be developed with this approach to art appreciation. So there are lots of little steps and steps back,
right,
steps forward, but also these opportunities that kind of pop up.
Amazing. It's difficult to make a living from art and literature. And so I'm curious, was there anything that worked really well for you that enabled you to make a living from this that others can learn from if they're thinking of going a similar path?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is difficult to make a living. One of the choices that I made pretty early on for my life is that the passion for the subject of my work was important to me. And I think that's something that 50 years ago, I'd be doing something very different. not very different. I probably wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today. I wouldn't be teaching online. I might be doing some other form of teaching that maybe might be part of an institution or something else. If 150 years ago, I'd certainly be doing something very different. And it's my conviction that no matter what work it is that you're doing, even if I were an electrician, for example, if I was doing it well and focused on doing a good job, I would find happiness with that. But for me personally, I was like, you know what? I've got these particular interests. I'm interested in philosophy. I'm interested in art and in literature. So I want to keep cultivating that. And so I've had opportunities to do something different that might be more lucrative. My mom, one of the big fights we had when I was in college is she wanted me to go into law school and to become a lawyer. Luke, you like philosophy, you like arguing, you know, this is the way to make money. But I gain a kind of level of satisfaction and happiness from writing a book, from spending time with art, from traveling and researching art, from discussing literature with students. And that over time became more and more part of me that I can't really see myself doing anything else. One is I'm a teacher. I love teaching. And that is a vocation. Taught at Van Damme Academy. And after Van Damme Academy, I was excited and motivated enough to want to create my own business. So literature at our house, my small company, that's my main source of revenue. And that is because there's this growing, thriving homeschooling community. And there are a lot of parents that share through word of mouth what works for their kids. And what I do with literature and with art appreciation works for a lot of kids. And so I've been able to keep customer base going. How long has it been? 13 years I've done literature at our house. Throughout, I could expand or keep the certain size that I wanted. I've not wanted to expand because I don't want to go into administration. I want to developing curriculum. That's what I really enjoy doing. But doing something that there's a definite need for, which is people still keep having kids. And they're going to want to have kids educated. And even for homeschool parents, it's really hard to do that. And so having somebody who's used to doing it, who's trained to do it, who's a bit of an expert in it, to teach their kid the classics, that's something that is a value and has to be even more and more value in the past 10 years. Part of it is I'm offering something that people want. And part of it is also when I'm doing the work that I really enjoy, I've had other kinds of opportunities pop up when people see Luke's doing this thing that's working well and it looks like it's meaningful to him. And so then there are other companies or institutions that reach out to me, and I've had opportunities to do kinds of work that I would not normally with a particular educational path that I've taken. I've only got a bachelor's degree, but I've done things that would require maybe PhDs. And so I've worked with art museums and I've worked with big educational corporations and had the opportunity to do certain things that may not be in line with how somebody might traditionally go through things, but because I'm doing this thing that I love and that I'm constantly working at, they're seeing competence and passion and reaching out.
Yeah, I think also the way I got to meet you was through the conference. So I think you also like to be in conferences and communities with similar ideas. And so that definitely keeps you very connected to the people and everybody gets to know you. I think the reason I went was because someone I met at the conference talked very well about you. And so I decided, yeah, it's an opportunity I want to miss. That is definitely important if you want to make a living in that space, that people refer you and you get the chance to get new people into the business.
Yeah. And that's important. I'd say I'm not very good at doing that. It's one thing. I talked about the homeschooling community a little bit. I've barely advertised for literature at our house in the years I've done it because word of mouth is such an important part of the homeschooling community. I could have more success than I do if I spent more time with that. I remember after I wrote Touching the Art, one of the decisions that I made, I was deciding, okay, should I hire an agent to basically advertise and to look for publishers or things like that? And I made the decision, you know what, I'd rather hold on to the money and me be the one to reach out. And perhaps that was not the right decision, but it was something that I wanted to figure out and experiment with. And maybe, I'm sure there are lots of people who are entrepreneurs out there who have more ability at spreading the word of getting into algorithms and things like that than I ever have. But I think part of that decision also about, okay, what do I want to spend my time doing? I've limited that part of it. Now, I have learned over time to get as many people involved in the projects that I'm really excited about as possible, and in the creation of those projects, and getting people involved for things that I am not as strong at doing. Also getting people involved to help motivate me to see the reality of those projects. So I'll give a particular example. My most recent book, Stories in Paint. That book, a hardcover, fully illustrated book, a very expensive thing to create and to produce. I needed to raise a lot of money beforehand in order to have enough copies to justify printing it. It was something that publishing world is not something that I'm too involved with at all. And I was doing this all on my own, but I got, I'd say, a dozen different people involved in the project in various different ways, from marketing to graphic design, to editing, to all these different parts of it, and consulted and reached out and talked to so many different people about writing, about beginning a Kickstarter funding, all these different things. And it became, okay, I'm my little crusade. I need to get people in my little crusade for this thing that I want to do.
I feel that sometimes when you have this passion and this mission and you have great friends, you gain these allies that want to help you in that.
Yeah. And then also going to people that I wouldn't normally go to. But I know that they have some experience or some skill. And it became like, here's my calling card for reaching out to you that I've never spoken to. I've got this mission I'm on. And what I found is very often when people hear that there's something that you are doing that you're passionate about, they're eager to give a bit of their time, to give a bit of their feedback, even if it's somebody that you're never going to talk to again, but that is going to be somebody that have been involved with before, that they can help, whether it's how do you be a consistent writer, or how are you going to create an app, or things like that.
You gave a lecture once about art as a tool for shaping your life. So that's your expertise. Is there anything that you would like to share here? Anything that you've seen has worked very well in your life, since you've spent more than 20 years using art and literature to make your life more rewarding, that we can take away, or at least look more into, so that we make our lives more enriching and our decisions also?
As you're describing that, it's occurring to me that a new project that I've started doing fits very nicely with this question. In the past month, I've started writing fiction. And the particular kind of fiction that I'm writing, I had this idea on a recent trip to Italy, is to write about moments that people have in front of art, to write about particular kinds of art experiences that somebody can have. Earlier, how I could describe to you the method, but it's nothing like experiencing it for yourself. And it's a little bit revelatory. It's like, whoa, that's possible. So I decided, okay, what would writing a short story about somebody who has an experience like that in front of an artwork, what would that look like? Yesterday, I just posted on my Substack my second story like that. And these are stories about young people who are figuring out their way in the world, who come across an artwork and see in the artwork, or in the way that they approach the artwork, some kind of experience, some kind of revelation that doesn't just apply to, oh, that was a great art moment, but that helps to shape how they're going to approach life. And I'll give a couple of ways, 2 ways in which experiences can help shape your life. One is they can make you more aware of something going on within you than you thought there was to begin with. They can make you stop and reflect and say, oh, that's what I'm feeling right now. I'm feeling uncertainty about this project that I'm about to get into because I'm seeing it in this story. So it's not just you're in this wonderful story, but in the process of getting deeper into it, you're also introspecting to understand what's going on in you. And that's actually the for my first story, Max and the statue. It's that kind of experience that this young professional who's about to start their own business is experiencing in front of the statue. A second thing is, after you have an experience in front of an artwork, whether it's something cathartic or revelatory or inspiring, you can hold on to that memory of that artwork by taking the prints. I like refrigerator magnets, and when you see them, it brings back the spark, that memory, and say, hey, you know what, I am going to slow down and enjoy things a little bit more, or you know what, I am going to push through. I remember that artwork about determination that I saw, and that time I went to the Louvre, and the powerful experience I had of reading that artwork, and I'm holding on to that, and I'm recalling it, and it's like listening to song lyrics, or it's like remembering an inspiring quote, seeing that image, not just the image of an artwork, but a kind of whole of the artwork story and your personal connections that you made to it that can now serve as a totem to inspire you going forward.
That's great. I read the first story about Max. What's the name of the statue again?
St. George.
And it's a masterpiece, right? Because you put the images, and from one angle it seems like he's not afraid and he's very courageous, and then from another angle you do see that he does seem to be afraid, right? So I think we'll put it definitely in the description. You can find it, because it definitely does exemplify better than, I guess, any type of explanation what art can do and how it can enrich your life. So
cool.
Thank you so much. It was a real pleasure talking to you today. Where can people find more about what you do?
touchingtheart.com. I've got a lovely website, beautifully designed website.
Made by my wife, and she really loved doing that. So we are very happy. So thank you very much, and see you, Luke.
Thank you, Alex.